This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Jack Hazlewood. He's a researcher focused on Hong Kong. He's lived there most of his life, but right now he's not in the country. I think that's important because the speed at which the CCP's so-called national security laws are scooping people up in Hong Kong and arresting them is getting quite bad. So we're going to be talking about that today, why the CCP has put these laws in Hong Kong and why some people are saying that this is the death of Hong Kong as a free society. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider subscribing to our Patreon. Keep us moving. Patreon.com/popularfront. I want to talk about what's been going on in Hong Kong in the last, I don't know, let's say like 6 weeks, maybe a little bit less than that. Or maybe a bit more rather. It seems like, China has basically got its stranglehold on the region now. Maybe just go over what has been going on there.
Yeah, so it started obviously with the national security law, which was implemented a couple of months ago now, and subsequently it almost feels like most days we're getting like sort of a month's worth of news and developments, like literally in the next sort of 24-hour periods. Multiple people been arrested, including like 2 people I know personally. It's like they've basically just decided to sort of export all of the sort of normal security practices, and they're just their normal sort of, what you might say like modus operandi in the mainland. It's just been almost in like the space of a couple of weeks. It's now fully taken over Hong Kong, and and it's obviously here to stay as well.
And what are these laws? They're really quite complicated, right?
Yeah, so the national security law itself, it concerns like 4 categories of offences. So it's sedition, secession, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. And it's the final one that's the most kind of like ambiguous and deliberately ambiguous, and it's the one that's likely to catch most people out. So basically, there is very little sort of guidance in the actual full text of it as to what it actually means. But judging from the arrests they've made so far, collusion with foreign forces could potentially mean you've met with, US politicians to discuss Hong Kong affairs. It could be to do with sort of fundraising overseas for Prodemocracy organisations and stuff. It's sort of inviting anything to do with sort of like, contact you have with someone abroad. If it's in any way, shape or form political, you're potentially liable to be charged, basically. No one is really safe from it at all. They will apply this to anyone and everyone they want, which is basically why it's so sort of people are so terrified of it.
And they started enacting it right away, didn't they?
So there were they didn't waste too long. There's only, I think the number of arrests is only in the sort of teens so far. I think we're up to like 12, 13 or something. But it's important to say as well, they tried this 17 years ago in 2003, and it was met with the most unbelievable backlash. At the time, Hong Kong's largest protest in history, 500,000 people on the streets, etc., etc., and they dropped the plans almost immediately because they just weren't expecting the public backlash. But basically, sort of as the pandemic hit and the protests died down for now, they basically have been just mulling this for sort of pretty much, I suppose, since the protest began. But the pandemic's provided them with, the perfect cover for it. I mean, it's still, even now, like, it's a massive risk for them to do it in terms of how it's going to play out long term. But it has to be said that the timing was perfect. I mean, if ever there was a time to do it, it's right now. They've got the timing nailed down to a T. But long term, how this is going to play out is, to talk about playing with fire is a massive understatement. It really, in terms of what it will do to people and how it will change protests, etc. in Hong Kong. Because, peaceful protest now has just been outlawed, essentially. They will probably never be given permission for a mass march ever again, which, has huge consequences, especially because the only other form of like peaceful resistance that people could sort of practice in Hong Kong is voting in elections, which have been, suspended, i.e. cancelled for an entire year. and they're going to basically, by the look of things, keep every Democrat off the ballot paper. So, as I say, all sort of forms of peaceful protest resistance to the CCP have literally just been completely and utterly outlawed now, and that has massive sort of consequences down the line.
And there was this footage where basically people were being dragged physically out of the Legco building. I think it was like Democracy opposition people were literally being carried out by security. What was going on there?
Yeah, so that was actually concerning one of the sort of subcommittees that are formed. Like, it's the same with like every sort of parliament legislator across the world. And basically the pro-Beijing chair of that committee was refusing to vacate her position in violation of like procedure, etc. But of course the people who hold like the equivalent of like Speaker of the House, etc. in Legco are all pro-Beijing. And essentially what happened is pro-democracy legislators basically tried to force her out of her seat physically, and they were just completely manhandled and assaulted by security, and dragged out. There've been sort of similar-ish scenes to do with the national security law and the national anthem law when they were being passed, but the ones that you're thinking of and the ones that kind of got flashed across the world were to do with that. Several pro-democracy legislators were actually hospitalised because of that. It was just crazy.
Right, and a lot of people have been leaving Hong Kong, right? UK has some kind of deal or something for people fleeing. Tell us about that. I've not really looked at it too closely.
Yeah, so it's absolutely massive. So basically, when the joint declaration was signed and there was the photo call with Deng Xiaoping and Thatcher, there were quite a lot of sort of unanswered questions. And one of the biggest ones was what was going to be the nationality status for Hong Kongers after the handover. Because, of course, Hong Kong was going from being a British overseas territory where everyone had a sort of variant of a British passport. Like, so everyone's passport said, British passport, Hong Kong on the front of it. So there was a huge unanswered question of what was going to happen. And basically what the British government decided to do in 1990 was give 50,000 families in Hong Kong, who were mostly the families of people like sort of top civil servants, police officers, almost like the elite of Hong Kong society, were all given British passports. And everyone else would be eligible for something called a B&O passport, British National Overseas. And up until recently, a B&O passport was literally just a sort of a worthless piece of paper, really, to be honest, in that it was a British passport, but it didn't give you residency rights in the UK or the right to work or anything like that. Very little in the way of concrete benefits. But now, I've got to say, it's like, I'm astonished that it actually sort of came to fruition in the end. Like, if you'd have told me this time last year that the UK government would have done it, I would never have believed you. But basically now, everyone who has a British National Overseas passport and their dependent families, so kids under 18, basically, which is basically around 2/3 of the Hong Kong population, all in all, are now eligible to come to the UK, and there's a path to citizenship that's been provided. Now, we're not going to see a sort of a mass exodus in the sense there's not going to be millions of people, but I think a couple of 100,000 people are going to follow through with it and actually leave. But it's almost like giving people sort of the ultimate insurance option, where even though it's fairly expensive and it's a long and drawn out process, etc., basically most people in Hong Kong now can basically come and settle in the UK. So it's a massive sort of game changing move, really. Right.
So is that the UK government basically recognising then that essentially they're refugees, of an authoritarian regime, if you like?
Sort of, I guess. And I think it's also like, I guess, a recognition of the fact that what happened with regard to the sort of the entire creation of B&O passports was just a disgrace, really, on a moral level. Nobody in Hong Kong ever voted for Chinese sovereignty to take over in 1997, and the fact that I think in those circumstances where your entire city is being given over without anyone having any say in Hong Kong, it was decided in Beijing and it was decided in London, right? In those circumstances, I think the only way in which it could have been in any way morally acceptable would be if you said to everyone in Hong Kong, right, as a sort of guarantee against your future, everyone's eligible for British citizenship. And they haven't quite gone that far, and they never would. But what it's basically done is it's opened up, the possibility for, as I say, most people in Hong Kong to come and settle in the UK. And it looks like some other Western countries, but particularly Taiwan, are basically looking like they're going to extend sort of eligibility to be pretty much close to anyone who wants to leave is going to be able to. Question of whether they could find a good job and stuff in like whatever country they manage to move to is a whole different question and things, but we're kind of rapidly approaching a situation where it looks like pretty much everyone who wants to leave is going to be able to do so, like in short.
And have we any idea of how many people have left already?
I mean, like, there was, I think for the when it was announced, like, you couldn't buy a flight for a few days and stuff, but I think it would be like a couple of thousand people, no more than that. Because it's only really like the high-profile activists, like, and most of them haven't left, but like a few high-profile people have. But I think like I think the Foreign Office released an estimate where they said they estimate it's going to be like 250,000 people over, can't remember how many years, I think maybe 5 years. I think that probably sounds about right, to be honest. Like, it will be a lot of people, but it's not going to be millions, just because of the fact that, yeah, even though I suspect millions of people want to, I mean, speaking to friends, I can tell you that's true, but you've got it, like, the entire process of like an international move, no guarantee of good employment in the UK, you're moving away from your family, also loads of people in Hong Kong, like in our doc that we made, do you remember the kid that we sort of Chung, like, it's a really big thing in Hong Kong how people basically massively underestimate their English skills. So like, you know, it's a massive sort of thing of like, if you basically just don't think your English is good enough, even though it probably is, you know, you'd be much more reluctant to like, you know, move to like, you know, whether it's the UK or wherever. So like I say, I suspect it's not going to be, you know, I'd be amazed if it's more than 500,000 over the next couple of years. But, you know, and Hong Kong's a city of like 6 or 7 million people, depending on the number you use. So, yeah, it's a significant number, but it's not, we're not going to see like a, you know, half the population leave, is my point.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the historic deal that was made then, that led to the autonomy and is now leading to essentially the destruction of that. You know, the historical thing with Thatcher and G. What was that all about?
Well, so basically after Mao died, because actually even before that, when Hong Kong, the first colony was set up in Hong Kong in the 1840s, it was just Hong Kong Island, which the analogy I would give is a bit like with sort of New York and Manhattan, or central London versus, you know, Greater London, if you like. So it's the kind of, it's part of the urban core, Hong Kong Island. And then a couple of years later, Britain took over the Kowloon Peninsula, which is basically that, those two areas are like the entire urban core of Hong Kong, if you like. But then in 1898, basically because of the fact that sort of overcrowding, Britain leased the new territories for 99 years from China, and the lease was set to expire in 1997. And basically after Chairman Mao died, the British government recognised there's this massive unresolved issue of what's going to happen to Hong Kong after 1997. And, you know, after Mao died, it was possible for sort of, you know, contact to open up with someone who wasn't a complete psychopath in charge of China. Tentative moves were made, and eventually basically what happened is Thatcher completely capitulated in the negotiations. She accepted the red line of Chinese sovereignty over Hong Kong without too much fuss. And, you know, there was all this talk of possibly like Chinese sovereignty and British administration, but basically just Beijing just wasn't going to accept that, and eventually Thatcher in the negotiations just accepted those red lines, really. And, you know, to this day, Hong Kong's suffering the consequences. And bear it in mind as well, that happened almost immediately after the Falklands War, when she capitulated, which is just the most bizarre thing, really, because, like, you know, it was at a sort of height of her power, she, you know, completely, I guess you'd say, just, you know, capitulated in the negotiations. Just utterly bizarre thing, because you associate such strength with her, really. But, you know, there we are.
Well, yeah, Thatcher, she was known for just destroying communities. What's going on now with the protest movement then? Because I know you said that like peaceful protest has basically been cancelled, if you like. But, you know, as we both know, those protesters didn't particularly care about the laws before. But I haven't seen any mobilisation, really.
Yeah, so like the day it came into effect, there was some people sort of attempted to protest and stuff, and the police operation they had was just, I can't even describe like how insane it was, in terms of literally anyone who was just young was just being stopped and searched, and loads of people just rounded up and arrested. You know, this ridiculous security operation. But also because of the fact Hong Kong has had like a massive sort of second wave with the virus cases, I'd be very surprised if anything happens in terms of like, you know, a return to sort of really significant protest before either there's a vaccine distributed, or maybe if Hong Kong manages to stamp out virtually all cases again. You know, I'd be surprised if that happened. But I think, a return to sort of, I might say, extreme violence of some kind on the streets is pretty much inevitable, I think. Like, anyone who thinks it's over, all I would say is, like, those scenes of, like, thousands of frontliners last year in, like, pitched battles with the police on the streets, those people haven't gone away. Do you know what I mean? They haven't, overwhelmingly, they're still in Hong Kong. Their, hatred for the government and whatever hasn't died down at all. And it will re-emerge at some point. It might take slightly different forms. It might descend into some kind of, like, almost urban guerrilla warfare. I mean, all these kind of things are sort of open possibilities at this point. But it's not over, that's for sure. It's definitely not over. It's just a question of when this kind of thing will resume, really.
That's interesting, because I thought this was it. I thought, no, they realise there's nothing they can do now.
Yeah, I mean, there's some resignation from a lot of people. But again, I just think... the protest last year, there was sort of, no one would have thought what happened last year was possible until it kind of just happened, if you see what I mean. And it took the spark of the extradition bill to light everything up again. And I think that's the kind of thing. It just takes the sort of the next spark to just, because Hong Kong is just a massive sort of pile of timber at the moment. It's just waiting to be set alight again. And sooner or later, something will come along. As I say, most likely post-pandemic. It might be in like a year or so's time. But yeah, like it's completely inevitable that something of that kind will resume. I mean, this isn't the sort of the end of sort of like protests as we know it in Hong Kong. Things will re-emerge. The question of like, is it going to go down, really sort of like, road that some people might sort of try and characterise as like even terrorism or something is entirely possible. Like, I'm not talking sort of Northern Ireland or like IRA or anything like that, but I think it is likely that the actions that some people decide to take are going to be basically sort of portrayed by the authorities as being, essentially sort of terrorism. They tried that already, but I think, that is probably going to be the mantra of whatever happens next, if you sort of catch my drift.
I actually agree. Like, a lot of people have said to me, no, don't be ridiculous. But I mean, I remember saying that, like, when the protest first kind of started, I was like, oh, it's not like we're going to see Molotovs or anything. And then within like 3 weeks, I was calling you up like, whoa, what the fuck's going on? And then when we met them, it was very clear to me that they were all in. A lot of them were all in. You know what I mean? There was no deviation. There was no backing down. So I can see that. I mean, I'm sure like a load of them will peel off and just go, right, it's done, and they'll leave, or they'll just go back to life. But I agree that I think maybe some of the frontliners essentially will become, I mean, you don't know, man. They're smart kids, and I'm sure they know how to create a bomb or whatever. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I really don't think that it's that far-fetched to think that could happen, considering the level of like authoritarianism that is already drawing in on Hong Kong. What exactly do you think Hong Kong will become like? Do you think that it's just going to become the same as Beijing in terms of like the laws and the authoritarianism and the surveillance, or do you think something different?
Well, it's a really hard one in the sense that like there's so many cliches that are thrown around over the last few months about the sort of like, the big one is sort of like Hong Kong is dead. Like, I've seen this written so many times in like loads of different sort of things, and it's like, obviously it's obvious to see what people are getting at, but there's one cliche that's repeated all the time that is actually really absolutely accurate, which is that the authorities in Beijing basically want to turn Hong Kong into any other Chinese city. That's exactly what their vision is, exactly. But the problem is that there's nothing that they can really do to sort of change the fact that Hong Kong isn't, in the sense that, Hong Kongers overwhelmingly use Cantonese as their first language, which isn't mutually intelligible with Mandarin, so you've got a massive, distinction there, if you like. Culturally, there's just so many different ways in which Hong Kong is just sort of culturally and so many other ways distinct from mainland China. And in terms of like what's going to happen and like where Hong Kong will be in sort of 5 years' time, it's not going to become a city of sort of Mandarin speakers, or it's not going to be on a sort of societal level much more integrated with mainland China. There's not really, even if the authorities planned a sort of like mass immigration move where they tried to move loads of mainlanders into Hong Kong, which probably wouldn't happen, but I guess in theory they could try something like that. I mean, it's never really going to like you can't sort of beat people into loving your government. Do you know what I mean? Ultimately people's sort of people's how they respond and how they feel about the regime isn't going to change because of any actions it takes, unless there's a concession made, which is just never going to happen. Obviously, they've been clear from the start, like there was never going to be any kind of like accommodation or anything. So like, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to sort of say what exactly Hong Kong's going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time, and I think it will feel more like one of the cities, big cities in the mainland. But at the same time, I just don't see that sort of like really big distinction, dissolving away. I just there's too much of a distinction to be made at this point in time for it to just sort of disappear anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, they've been pretty upfront, right? I mean, well, maybe let's talk about it. What is the CCP? What have they actually said about this situation themselves officially?
Well, officially, I mean, the national security law is what it says on the tin. It's been invoked because of threats to national security, as opposed to it being a mass sort of political purge. I think there was an interesting thing, and I don't know who actually said this. I think it was an anonymous quote from an article I read ages ago. I was thinking about it earlier, where he said the difference between mainland China and Hong Kong has always been that in Hong Kong you've never had to fear the knock on the door in the middle of the night, if you get what I mean. You've never sort of had to fear being spirited away, under darkness or whatever. Whereas in mainland China, that sort of happened, pretty much well before even the CCP came into power. But yeah, and another analogy I'd say that everyone in Hong Kong pretty much knows the feeling of is, when you cross the border into mainland China, like I did after we finished filming our doc, I went over to the mainland to like buy some cheap clothes and stuff. And you always have this sort of feeling of when you come back to Hong Kong over the land border, it's just this sort of like sigh of relief, even if you haven't done anything political in the past or you're not a journalist or anything like that. It's just this feeling of sort of lightness of like, oh, well, you're kind of safe again and nothing's going to happen to you, blah, blah. And that has just gone now. You know what I mean? That is something which is now a sort of, I wouldn't feel any safer, being in Hong Kong right now than I would if I was living in mainland China, to be honest. I think that sort of, that feeling of security and of, the sense that, the law will protect you and you're protected from like, arbitrary arrests and all that kind of thing, that has just gone. So I suppose in one sense, like, in terms of integrating Hong Kong with mainland China, that is something that has happened. But the really interesting thing, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this, is the question of actually, it is entirely possible in a couple of years' time that Hong Kong could really be sort of forced down the road of like Xinjiang and Tibet, where actually there is less political freedom in Hong Kong than in your average mainland city. And that is just, if you'd have told me this time last year that was something that even people would be talking about as a serious possibility, I'd have told you you've been fucking crazy, to be honest. And just the fact that is a genuine possibility now, that Hong Kong could become some kind of like counterpart or sort of zombified sibling of like Xinjiang and Tibet in terms of the kind of oppression we see. I mean, it's just it is a sort of total nightmare vision, but it's entirely possible now.
Well, I would have disagreed with you as well, like a couple months ago, but seeing how fast everything happened.
The speed, yeah.
And then now, I mean, this morning even, I was reading about the AI and the surveillance state in Beijing. And I mean, frankly, it's absolutely wild what they're trying to do. They're literally trying to kind of stoke out or stamp out political dissent kind of before it happens. So like they want to like start monitoring there's technology where they're considering how to monitor people's facial expressions based on how they read certain propaganda. Like, does that tell them that they don't like that? If so, they'll be put on a system. Like, and this isn't just Xinjiang. I mean, it's being tested in Xinjiang, which is essentially a laboratory for, the CCP authoritarian dreams, I guess, of how to get even harder on the people. But it is going to happen elsewhere, and it is happening in Beijing. And it's just, it's a scary prospect, man. So I don't think it's too outrageous what you're saying. Talking about people that are, people are getting oppressed. The young lad Wilson there, the lad we met, a really nice guy, journalist over in Hong Kong. He was arrested, right? I know you can't really talk too much, but maybe explain to us what happened and, what he went through.
Yeah, so just before I was helping with, I can't go into specifically what we were doing, but I was speaking to some journalists instead of a press conference, and literally 3 minutes before we were due to start on Zoom, a notification popped on my Facebook, and it was just Wilson arrested, NatSec law, no other info. And it's just a friend saying, and I almost felt like I'd been shot or something. Because to give you a sense of what he's like, what Wilson is, he's not high profile at all. Like, so he's had involvement with sort of activist things and stuff, and he now works as a freelancer for ITV. And ironically, like the ITV producer, I know her in Hong Kong, and she asked me, like, do you know anyone who'd be like a good fixer or like researcher for us and stuff? And I recommended Wilson, and that's how he got that sort of gig. But yeah, Wilson, like, he has phenomenal contacts in terms of, like, he knows everyone in the sort of pro-democracy movement and stuff. But he's always been very sort of backroom. Like, he's had no profile at all. And what he's accused of is basically running a social media group that is basically, it translates as "I want Lam Chow," and Lam Chow is basically this idea of, it's usually translated as like "burn with us" strategy, which is basically, this is one of the things that the authorities have basically said violates the national security law. The irony is, I can say publicly that he doesn't run that group, so as to what's going to happen if he gets charged and brought to trial, we don't know. But some of these cases will just fall apart in court, because even though the national security law is totally draconian, it is being sort of like fused with Hong Kong's existing legal system, which is actually, even with the things that have happened in the last year, is still largely sort of intact for now. So anyone charged under the national security law, as long as they're not sent to the mainland, which is a provision under it for certain cases, everyone tried in Hong Kong will basically get a fair trial under the law.
Right, but I mean, come on, they can change that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what I mean is, like, the point is, like, the judges who will be presiding over this, even though the chief executive does pick the judges who will be presiding over it, they're not these like CCP shills and stuff, if you see what I mean. So I suspect in the initial few cases, people will be getting due process and everything, but if the law isn't delivering the results that Beijing wants, they can just send down an interpretation from the NPC Standing Committee like that, and they can basically harden the legislation as and when they want to at any time they're choosing, because it's been introduced into the actual constitution of Hong Kong, the basic law, and the ultimate power of interpretation is held with a body in Beijing, not in Hong Kong. So no court in Hong Kong has sort of ultimate power of interpretation over the national security law, essentially. So, as I say, I think some of these cases, I mean, like, we've had people charged with rioting in Hong Kong who weren't even present at the event that the police have alleged that they were rioting at. And of course, they fell apart within minutes, these trials and stuff. And I suspect we're going to see some of those cases of the national security law as well, because prosecution service is running all over the shop. They've got thousands of people they want to charge with offences, but they don't have the resources to be able to do it, basically. So we're going to see a lot of high-profile cases which will fall apart. I just hope with Wilson's that's what happens if he gets charged. But yeah, I mean, it's, I suspect down the line, though, we're going to see, with regards to the national security law, due process will probably just disappear completely with it. But for now, people will, largely at least, probably be getting sort of a fair trial and things, even though the law is horrendously draconian and stuff. They will at least be able to have, like, as I say, a fair trial. But we'll see what happens to that in the future.
So he's basically just been charged with running an activist account.
Well, he hasn't been charged yet, but I believe that's what that's what media reports, and I spoke to him briefly and stuff, and that was what he was questioned about in custody. But it's unclear yet whether they'd want to sort of try and invoke other stuff or anything. It's just impossible to say. But as it stands, like, that was basically the reason why he was arrested. And the specific article under the security law that he was arrested under was collusion with foreign forces. That was what basically he was arrested for, which is just mad, obviously. But yeah, there we are.
And it's retroactive, right? I mean, I think someone was saying to me that, like, because we did our film, if I come back there, I could be arrested for filming with the activists before this even came in. Completely.
I mean, it is retroactive, so anyone can be charged with anything they've done at any point in time, and it's extraterritorial as well, so they're claiming universal jurisdiction, which means that anyone, anywhere in the world, regardless of whether you've set foot in Hong Kong or not, can be charged, which is just, the complete, it's an utterly ludicrous sort of piece of legislation, but it's deadly serious. It's real, it's been implemented, it was railroaded through Hong Kong's institutions, or rather it wasn't actually, it was just directly implemented by Beijing. They didn't even go through LegCo, but yeah. So but it's, as I say, we can describe all these things about it and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's already been implemented now. So the effects of it are going to become very real for some people very quickly. And we just have to sort of see how the trials will proceed and stuff.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Jack, I just want to talk briefly about the very annoying white police officers that work for the CCP in Hong Kong and the scandal that has happened to them. Let's talk about that. What happened?
Okay, yeah. So basically, for people who don't know, the Hong Kong police used to be dominated in terms of the senior officers with literally white British police officers. And now, even though there's only about 50 of them left in the force, some of the most senior officers, so 3 of the 6 regional commanders in the force, which is one of the most senior ranks, 3 of the 6 are literally white British guys. And they've had like loads of sort of grief over the last few months because they stand out so much, like, so they're almost like, they are kind of celebrities essentially, and basically they've been building loads of illegal extensions on their homes, most of which are on government land anyway, because they've got like, you know, sweetheart property deals and all that. Also Rupert Dover, the most famous one, turns out he built an illegal extension on his house, rented it out on Airbnb, and not only that, he wasn't even allowed to be living in the house, as has been, I believe, Lands Department is still investigating it, and he's claiming it was like through his wife's family, because it was basically, these houses were built for people who were made homeless from a typhoon that happened a couple of decades ago. But basically, like, the question was raised, like, why are you living there when the deed is non-transferable? I mean, he's alleged it's like his wife's family or something. And now they're also facing a private prosecution in the UK on charges of torture. So we're going to see how that all plays out. But yeah, I mean, it's just been a massive personal embarrassment to them. It made this was like front page news and everything a few months ago. So yeah, just pretty funny to see them, you know, publicly humiliated essentially.
What's torture? What's that case?
A guy called Luke de Pulford, who is I guess you say sort of activist, but also like has worked in human rights stuff for a long time. Basically, there's going to be a private prosecution launched against certain unnamed senior British Hong Kong police officers. And basically, the allegation is that they have presided over torture of people in custody. There's been a sort of call-outs for evidence and things. And, you know, as to how that will proceed to court, it's unclear. But if they're found guilty under this eventually, then they would basically either have to come and serve the sentence in the UK, or they would have like an Interpol red notice issued against them or anything else. So, you know, but clearly, like, in terms of like because of the fact they're regional commanders, in theory, you could argue that something that happens within the region of, you know, if someone gets tortured or whatever in that region, you know, you could hold them responsible. So, you know, we just have to see how that sort of plays out. But under British law, torture is the UK claims universal jurisdiction. So if you're a British national, you can be charged with torture if you've committed it anywhere in the world under British law. So, you know, it's sort of the legal basis for this is not sort of frivolous. It's sound. So we'll sort of see what happens on that. But it will be probably quite a long time before that comes back in the news due to court dates or anything. But we'll see.
And this is based on the treatment of detained protesters in Hong Kong?
Primarily, yeah.
Jesus. All right, mate. Tell us your social media where people can get hold of you and see your work.
Sure. So I'm Jack H Hazlewood on Twitter, spelled L-E, so JackHazle Wood. And yeah, that's I only really do Twitter. I don't really do any other sort of social media and stuff.
Cool, man. All right, thanks very much, Jack.
Cheers.
That was Jack Hazlewood speaking about the legal stranglehold that the CCP has put over the autonomous region of Hong Kong, not looking like it's autonomous anymore, unfortunately. If you like what we're doing at Popular Front, please, as usual, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Support us there. $5 a month, you get bonus episode. $10 a month, you get early access to new episodes. You get the bonus episodes as well. You get access to the community Discord. You get access to the educational series we're doing, Too Cool for J School. You get discount codes for the merchandise, which you can buy at www.popularfront.shop. Check us out on all those things. The more we grow on the Patreon, the more Popular Front grows. This is all independent, all grassroots. This episode was sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Tell them Popular Front sent you. The episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House, and then go down and see them. Tell them Popular Front sent you, as usual. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get prints at propagandopolis.com and use the code POPULARFRONT10 to get 10% off. This episode is also sponsored by Black Triangle, an independent company selling self-defense tools. Check them out at blacktriangle.com, but it's spelled BLKtriangle.com. Check them out. Tell them Popular Front sent you. Like I said, please subscribe to us on the Patreon as well. You get loads more bonus content there. Patreon.com/popularfront. Social medias, follow us on Twitter, Popular Front CO. Mine is at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. The Instagram is at popular.front. The youtube.com/popularfront. And that's everything, I think. Check out our website, popularfront.co. Everything is collated there. I do need to update it. But yeah, thank you very much to the following high tier Patreons. They are K. Hardy Roberts, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Bastian Gamillo Rittmeyer, Ian Froese, James Colley, Michael Akakan, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Maxwell Burke, Anthony Kabarak, Mike Barone, Dong Wayne, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Fragile Feeling, Chris Cusimano, Sebastian from the Discord, Degenerate Zero Alpha, DR, Trey Nance, Charlie, Olin Thorne, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, Prashant Singh, Azad, Frank Austin, Amelia Mee, Christina Ravetti, Moody Al-Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Ari from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Saruche Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Berg Snyder, Scartoon Music, Stephen Davila, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q-Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sendercock, and Joanne Stocker. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your support. If you guys vanish, then Popular Front frankly would vanish as well. So thanks so much. If people want to support us, patreon.com/popularfront or popularfront.co/support, one of the others. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black, aka Son of Old. Check his music out at samblackpf.com. We're trying to work out how to do a vinyl kind of a one-off thing, put it on sale. We might be using crates, I don't know, but anyway, we're going to work all that out. But yeah, check us out, popularfront.co.